Hi, this is Chris from Orange Coast College's Art Department, reviewing selections and masks in Adobe Photoshop for digital painters and illustrators. First, I want to take a look at selections and then contrast those to masks and see the relationship and where they overlap. Now, a selection just means that you want to make changes in this area of this layer. So let's paint for a second without a selection. So it goes anywhere within my canvas. I'm on layer 1 over here, and you can kind of see it in the thumbnail, the changes that I made. But sometimes you want to constrict the area that you want to work in to be a little bit more precise. So let's undo that and pick up the Lasso tool. And I'm just going to make a crazy shape here so you can see a selection. Now, sometimes these are called marching ants, but you can see it's a dashed line that's sort of animating. And most of the time you can see it, but sometimes if you're working on, high contrast, noisy black and white images, that line can be harder to see, but typically this is what it looks like. Now let's grab our brush again and do that same sort of painting all over the place. And you can see that it's only making marks within my selection. And that's the whole purpose of selections, to restrict where you can make marks and where you can make adjustments and changes. So let's take a quick look at our tools. I'm going to go ahead and back up, get rid of our paint, and get rid of our selection. I use the Lasso tool. There's also the polygon lasso tool, which I actually find more useful most of the time. And these make sort of free-form shapes. Of course, the marquee tools, rectangular and elliptical, they'll make geometric shapes. The magic wand and quick selection tool will make selections based on color and value. You can use the vector tools like the pen tool and take a couple steps and turn that into a selection. And then you can use brushes when you're in the quick mask editing mode. So you can enter quick mask, use some brushes, exit quick masks, and it becomes a selection. You can also add and subtract selections. So let's take a look at a rectangular selection here. Up here in the options bar, you can add and subtract and intersect, but I usually use hotkeys. So I'm going to hold down Option and take away. I'm going to hold down Shift and add, and then I'm going to hold down Option and Shift and intersect. And you can mix multiple tools together, so I can hold down Add and I can add a little polygon lasso tool. I can come back here in the elliptical tool and let's say subtract an ellipse. Lots of things that we can do. You can fill the selection, so I'm going to fill with foreground color. You can paint within them, and you can make adjustments. So in order to make some adjustments, let's go ahead and take a look at this photo. And what I mean by that is let's use the quick selection tool and see if we can get this ellipse here. Actually, how about the lasso tool? Freeform lasso is much better when using a stylus than a trackpad or a mouse. But you'll get the idea. Okay, so let's adjust the hue of this photograph just within that selection. So any changes I make, let's say skewing the hue or saturating it or desaturating it, will only take effect within that selection. What else can we do? Let's run a filter, but just run it on this part of the sky to make it seem like we had a faster lens on this photo. So I've made a selection, and now I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And I can make some adjustments here. and it will only affect that area that I made a selection in. Pretty straightforward. Now, sometimes you might have a mixture of tools and the selection might be jagged, particularly when you're using something like the magic wand or the quick selection tool. So let's see if we can try this again. There's my quick selection tool on that ellipse. Let's try this guy, and that took off a little much, and that guy. There's also refining your selection. So I can click this select and mask, and I'm going to increase my transparency so you can see. And they're kind of jagged edges there, right? So I can drag my smooth bar over, and it'll smooth out some of those imperfections. I can feather it. I can shift the edge inward or out. I can do a lot of different really small adjustments using this. So that is selections. Choosing an area where to have sort of one-time mark making or image adjusting. But a lot of the time you want to leave your options open to change your mind later, to make edits, that sort of thing. So let's take these ellipses, for instance. Instead of just working within the selection, I'm going to turn them in using an adjustment layer for hue and saturation. And because I've got the selection active, when I choose this hue and saturation adjustment layer, it's going to take that selection and turn it into a layer mask. Now, layer masks leave your options open so you can change things all you want. Let's say, for instance, I wanted to make those ellipses red. Great, looks good. And then I did a bunch of other work, and I spent an hour or two on this, and then I decided, you know what? I'd like to get that other blue ellipse. So let me get to my photo layer with the quick selection tool. I can make that selection. I'm going to go back to my layer mask, and I'm going to go ahead and fill that with white. What's black is going to prevent that effect from taking place, and what is white is going to let the effect come right through. So I'm going to fill that with white by clicking Option Delete. So I can get right back to that hue saturation, and I can extend it. So that's one way I made a selection and I filled it. I could paint this selection in. So let's pick a paintbrush, and let's put a feathered edge on this so I've got nice and big. And I can go ahead and paint on this mask with white after I drop my selection. I can paint that effect in, which is pretty cool. So I'm getting that full hue shift applied by just painting in my mask. And the nice part about masks, they are essentially grayscale images going from black to white and the 256 steps in between. And you can use brushes, all kinds of brushes, selections, to modify that mask. Let's go ahead and clear this image and create a selection, and then I'm going to go ahead and make a layer mask on this, layer 1. So here we are, I've got a selection, and I'm going to go ahead and click this button here, Add Layer Mask, and it's going to choose it from that selection. Now my selection's gone, and if you remember the first time we painted, let's go ahead and get ourselves a bigger brush. And if you remember the first time I painted all over the page unless there was a selection. This time I'm going to click on my layer, so I'm painting on my layer and not the mask. And I can only paint where the mask is showing it. And if I wanted to know what that stroke look like without the mask, I can control click on my mask thumbnail and I'll say disable layer mask. And it shows me the whole stroke that I made. Now I can go back and enable it. And I can work for 2 hours and come on back and go, you know what? Oh, I totally should have made my selection a little different. I should have added this part. And then over here, I should have added that part too. And I can copy drag. And I can use my full range of Photoshop tools just to fine-tune that mask. So it gives me the option to edit as long as my file is open. So I generally suggest that unless you're doing really quick hit changes that you know you'll not be concerned about changing your mind later, work with masks rather than selections. But if you're going for speed and you're going to one-time hit it and keep on moving, go ahead, make a selection, paint and make adjustments within it, and keep on moving on. Now some tips about working with selections and masks and working back and forth from them. One thing that's really great is you can command click on a Mac on layer thumbnails and get that selection again. So I'm going to hold down command, see how my cursor changes, and I'm going to click on that mask and it turned it back into a selection for me. Pretty good. Works the same with layer thumbnails. Let's say I wanted to get the selection that was that full brush stroke I made. I'm going to command click on my layer thumbnail, and that took all the pixels and made a selection out of them. Now let's think about what if we wanted to create a selection and save it. How would we do that? Let's go ahead and clear our layer here and make a selection that we love. Let's say we did that just right. It worked great, but I don't need it right now. Let's say it took me 15 minutes to make that selection, which sometimes that happens. How can I save it? What I like to do is in the Channels palette, I can come on down here and save this selection as a channel. These are called alpha channels. And many applications use them, and you kind of want to pay attention to alpha channels. So let's say I'm back working normally here. Let's start a new layer and just paint away. Been working, and I'm like, oh, I really wanted that selection I did 3 hours ago, but it's in a channel. I can command click on that thumbnail, or I can come on down here, select that channel, click this button, which is load channel as a selection, which is the same equivalent as command clicking on the thumbnail. And now I'm going to go back to my RGB, which is my normal working channels. And there's my selection. Now some of you may be thinking, how come he keeps making those selections go away so easily? As often as you make a selection, you have to get rid of the selection. And the way to get rid of it normally is to go to the select menu and choose deselect. But you'll notice to the right there, the menu has the keyboard shortcut of Command D. And honestly, I use Command D so much that I program it into my multi-button mouse and my stylus. So get good at either keyboard Command D, or you can program that into your input devices, because every time you make a selection, you need to get rid of that selection to keep working once you're done with it. So there's some tips for you. Selections are a way to temporarily make adjustments on the layer you're on with making marks or image adjustments. Masks are created originally from selections, but you can keep them with your layer and edit them over time so that if you change your mind, you can go back to them. Channels are a way to save masks and selections, and that's handy. And Command D is the Mac keyboard shortcut to drop your selection. Other keyboard shortcuts that we mentioned in this video: when you're creating a selection, Option takes it away, Shift adds, and Shift Option intersects. Again, those are these three buttons. They're just keyboard equivalents. So I hope that helps you out. Practice all the different tools for making selections. One of the differences between a beginning Photoshop artist and an advanced is knowing which selection tool to use for which job. So as you get better, you'll start using more tools to make a variety of selections. So get to know those and keep making great art.